in the startup ecosystem through his investments at DataPower Ventures and Tech Dinner Series, where his community events connect founders and venture capitalists. He is also an avid podcast host for the Humain Podcast, focused on responsible application of AI across enterprise software before it was cool. And now Moyedzin, he studied CS and product design at Stanford, a local university for those who don't know, and has spent the past 5 years leading product teams in various industries, including e-commerce, search, ads, and insurtech. As a second-time founder, Moyed successfully and is currently focused on building infrastructure for AI engineers in retrieval augmented generation through NestMed. He is also actively contributing to open source projects with autonomous agents. All right, please welcome them to the stage.
All right. How's everybody doing today? Do we have Dan Harding in the? Oh, there we go. So I heard Dan is running a startup into the ground, but at least he's got some dance moves supposedly at the vinyl room. Is that true? You want to maybe later you can show us some of those.
It's Sunday Fun Day, right?
So it's so great to meet you and to be able to moderate this session tonight. Do you want to start off just giving us a brief introduction about your background for all of those who didn't get a chance to hear it yet?
Yeah, thanks, Mo. Appreciate it. Hey, everyone. David, nice to meet you. Thanks for being here this weekend. My background, so 5-time tech operator. I spent the last 10 plus years of my career working for startups. I was at 2 early stage startups, helping them raise their seed and A rounds, 2 mid stage startups leading and scaling data science teams, and 1 late stage startup in a global role, building out product and enablement. That one is single store, MemSQL, which is a database still active in the space. Most recently joined Google about a year ago, so helping build out products in the ads ecosystem. We'll talk a little bit about building product anywhere from early stage to late stage to big tech throughout the session today. And got involved also in the VC ecosystem, so been deploying in what's known as the applied AI space for the last 5 years, anywhere in the data, ML, AI, quantum, and deep tech space.
Perfect. So what impressive background. And you're involved in so many things, it's kind of hard to keep track. So you have like a podcast, you do some newsletters, you do investing. So you have and obviously you've been an operator for a very long time. So this is incredibly amazing. The title of this talk is Product Development Strategy, How Technical Roadmap and Go-to-Market Unification Accelerate Startup Growth. So do you want to break that down for us just a little bit?
Yeah, so I think when you're building a startup, it's always about momentum. And I think the challenge is we're so focused on building what the industry says that you want, but is it what you really need to build? And so when I talk about tech roadmap and I talk about unification, it's making sure that you're building for your customers or your future customers or those design partners, not building for the sake of hype and FOMO. And I think that's this technical roadmap that is being informed based on how you're going to grow your user base or revenue. And often as founders, we forget about this. We're thinking about the hype. We're thinking about generative AI. Everyone, let's build generative AI because that is the future. And it might be to some perspective, but it's more than the technology. And I think we'll dive deeper into this.
Yeah, of course. Maybe we can just start off really quick. Do you have a really good example as your history as an operator? Do you have a really good example where you've done this successfully, and maybe one where you made a mistake and it didn't really work?
Yeah, so one that didn't work, one of the early startups I was with, we were building a subscription-based Instagram for influencers. This is just around the time that Snapchat came out. So we were really focused, dialed in on the space, working with many of the leading artists that you see on the stages today, including those who have been on tours this year. But the issue is that we were chasing subscriptions. We weren't actually building a product that users wanted. I think we were before our time, which was the issue. This was, again, think about the platforms today. We have Patreon, we have Substack, we have these paywalls, but it wasn't being used by the market. And so our challenge was, how do you know when you're building something that's at the right time or too early before its time? That was the case there. The more successful one, which was at Single Store. So Single Store, just for background, it's a database. They're an HTAP database. They're on the cloud. And one of our core features was to build a SQL completion engine. And of course, today, everyone knows that SQL completion is around because of generative AI, and there's a lot of startups in that space. But for us, it was listening to our customers. So I joined Single Store when they're about 15 million ARR. Now they're north of 100. And we had our core clients like Palo Alto Networks, Apple, Bank of America, and they were saying, we need help to generate SQL faster. We need to look at our primary databases and schemas and help our engineers be more efficient. So we weren't building a product for the sake of, hey, we think this is cool. Our customers who are paying millions of dollars said, this is something we would use today and every day. And so we launched that product just about a year ago, and it's been doing pretty well.
Great to hear. I think you have such a rich history operating in businesses that deal with data, and specifically this latest example that you gave about Single Store. I'd love to just take a step back for a second and understand more about, can you take us through, what have the last 15 years of working with data been like? And by extension, what are the next 5 years going to look like, given your experience and your expertise in this space? What should we expect in the next 5 years?
Yeah, so this industry has evolved a lot. It started out not being on the cloud. Everyone worked on on-prem hardware, like these IBM mainframes. We were using COBOL, Fortran, some of these older programming languages. That was probably around 2005 to 2012. Python, SQL, R became really popular since 2012. We started seeing the movement of running different end-to-end applications with CI/CD, using like GitHub, GitLab, using Airflow, other tools like that. Around 2016, 2017, we started seeing collaboration in the data ecosystem. So no longer did you use offline products, but Tableau went on the cloud, or you could use a cloud Jupyter notebook and collaborate, share code, edit together. Then what happened is the entire application stack went into the cloud when we had a thing called COVID, right? So I think we go to the world of BC and AC, before COVID and after COVID. So before COVID, we weren't really cloud first. Companies were hybrid. Then everyone jumped to the cloud. Adoption is through the roof. We said, oh, well, the only thing we could do is be remote. We could use remote desktop environments. We could use cloud environments like Kaggle or Replit to build out these different notebooks. So we saw a lot of adoption there, but there wasn't a lot of ML AI being used in real-time systems. It was mostly these data systems like pipelines, end-to-end processing, bringing data into a central place and extracting insights. Now we've accelerated into this AI-first world, and we can call this circa 2019 plus. It started out with giving me real-time insights. Here's my dashboard. Let me refresh this Tableau or Looker dashboard in real time to let me now serve models and serve results. I think that started with companies like Weights and Biases. We saw that with Neptune. We've seen that most recently with a lot of other observability companies. And then, think of late 2022, a lot of research came out, and that research created better transformers. So these transformer technologies have been around since circa 2017, but they started getting really good, and they got human level good, such that early 2023 is when ChatGPT came out, and then Bard came out, and other generative experiences. And I equate these generative experiences to the days of Microsoft Excel and Google Sheets coming out. There was a time before when no one used the spreadsheet. But today, any opportunity that you work with, you're probably tracking data and measuring results in a spreadsheet. I think that's the early indicators we're seeing with these generative experiences. If you generate photo, text, audio, video, we're going to be moving into a world in the next few years where we're all going to be generating prompts. We're all going to be generating content or strategy to accelerate our products. And we're seeing those early signals. Google released through our Vertex AI Enterprise Cody, which helps you generate code to speed up application development in C#, C++, and Python. We're seeing that, of course, with other tools in the space. So it's going to be the great accelerator for product development.
Yeah, as you're talking, one quick thought came to mind. So in my experience working in e-commerce, one of the huge things that we always talked about was how do we curate? Because this is at a time when marketplaces were really just becoming large. And, like Amazon, for example, in the last 5 to 10 years has really grown their marketplace play. But one of the challenges is curating all of this data. In the case of e-commerce, it's all of these items that are for sale, curating them to fit what the customer is actually looking for. And I would imagine that this is the first step, right, that's happening right now, is people are just generating. And the next step as we're moving towards is going to be at some point curating and refining what is actually being produced. So I'd love your thoughts on like what do you think is happening in terms of the curation world? If it's too early right now, or where do you think that's going to go?
I think curation's everything. I mean, everyone here in the audience, if you go on Amazon today or you go on Instagram and you get served an ad, usually the products are quite familiar. They're quite helpful for you. Just the other day, I got a recommendation on Instagram. I bought a product 2 minutes later. So these lookalike audiences are available today, but curation is becoming ever more important because there's so much noise out there. Our attention spans are so limited. We only have so much time. So if you can build a product that effectively curates, what you're providing in essence is insights as a service. You're offering on-demand, machine-recommended insights, and your customers are going to trust you for that if you give them what they need. That's the benefit of curation. I think a lot of platforms can make a lot of money through that.
One other aspect that I know you talk frequently about is the ethical use of AI, making sure that it's equitable, inclusive, along the lines of curation. What are your thoughts there, right? Like what are the best practices and principles that companies need to adopt in order to make sure that their final outputs are inclusive, equitable, those types of things?
So having data is good, but having useful data is better. And one of the challenges in the market today is everyone wants to monetize their data. They want to license it. They want to put it to good use. But just because you have data, is it representation of your entire customer base? The challenge is when you bring anything into a model, traditionally we're thinking of black box, garbage in, garbage out. But to be effective, we need to represent our entire audience. That's something early on that I've seen stress testing products in the AI space, is if you aren't having a representative data set, you're going to have gaps. And those gaps ultimately will create a less than stellar process for your customers. So when you're serving models, you need to ensure that you're how are you gathering new data, and how are you constantly building that feedback loop so that your data moat grows. I think in this world of building AI-first products, it's going to require having large data sets, but having data sets that are representative. And that means building things that are factual and creating different metrics that represent your users for where they're at. So you might have a North Star metric on how inclusive is my final result. Not just the classic how accurate, how precise from the data science perspective.
That's amazing. Yeah. And one of the unique challenges that we're facing with NestMed right now is looking through sparse data sets. Where, for example, a lot of cells are just not available. What are your best thoughts on how to deal with things like that?
So when you have a sparse data set, you either need to use some data science technique to pre-populate, right, or standardize results, but that inserts bias in itself. Because if you're replicating results that aren't there, you're going to potentially over-represent data. Sometimes collecting new data and having this human feedback in the loop process is essential. And I think that's what companies who are doing really well in the AI space are doing, is they're not leaving it only to the machine, they're actually including the human as well. We've seen that stress testing products both in startups and in big tech. And I'll just preface, I know we're live streaming here. This session is not, I'm not speaking on the behalf of Google, right? So this is just on myself and the products that we've tested. But I think it's very important to keep humans in the loop. You get to see a lot of nuances there that you wouldn't see only from the machine.
Do you have a specific example of a company that's done this really well that you've worked with?
So serving models, I think, one example that I really like, a company I used to work with, Booz Allen Hamilton. So they for everyone's background, they're in the government sector. They do a lot of financial analytics and highly sensitive data. But what I really like about their system is that they take a very bespoke process to end. And what I mean by that is they're constantly for example, if they're serving like a loan processing application for federal government employees, they're not just taking the end result as you get approved or denied and giving that to a customer, but they're having humans in the loop to review the process. There might be a scenario where someone gets denied an application, but they should get approved, but there was a low amount of data to represent these people. And because of that, they need to increase that sample size of data and go through and have human intervention. I think this is critical for us to truly nail AI-first applications. If we're going to build the world of Westworld, where everyone is a prompt engineer and everyone's creating generative content, we have to ensure that we're working together. Otherwise, you're going to create scenarios where I might say, generate a legal briefing and then present the legal briefing to a judge, and you assume everything is factual and true when it may not be. I'm speaking to a big case that was live in the media in the last few months that you may have heard of, where there was a lawyer who just assumed factuality of the data, and they didn't cross-check. And then the judge, said, "Oh, you can't do this. This is not attributable." We have to ensure we're building fully inclusive data sets.
Yeah, so absolutely. And I think like a lot of companies specifically in generative AI today are exploring generating synthetic data. And I know with us with NestMed, the way that we're going about dealing with this sparse data set problem is by generating that synthetic data. And I think what you said is exactly spot on, right? Like introducing human feedback for that synthetic data process to make sure that, first of all, it's equitable and inclusive, and second of all, that it's still high quality and is not biasing your data set for the task at hand, right? Whether that's predicting a disease or trying to code a medical bill, whatever it might be. So yeah, really, really great things to think about. I think a lot of companies are struggling with this and trying to figure out what are the best practices for how they can get the highest quality output.
Yeah, and when you're building products, whether we're thinking of AI-first products or whichever product that you're building, you need to have metrics to track these products, these North Star metrics. I think tracking for the sake of tracking is not beneficial, because then you just have too much data, you don't know what you're measuring. But you should have a solid 3 to 5 metrics that you're able to look at, and this can help you ensure that when you're building, are you continuing to go up and to the right? Are you continuing to see that growth? Metrics could be something as simple as what is usage on a daily basis? What is the time spent? Or it could be something we talked about before. How inclusive is an app? How usable are the features?
I want to shift gears just a little bit since you have so many experiences and roles and talk a little bit about you as an investor. But just really quick, one thing that we have is the Slido. And I'd love I see there's a bunch of questions that people posted. And I'd love to cover a lot of the things that you guys are interested in. So if you can please go to the Slack, and there's a posting in the Slack in the general on how to get the Slido link. And I think there's also a code, is that correct?
Yeah, so I'll give you background. If you haven't used Slido before, it's a free platform where you can submit a question and upvote a question. So we've already received some great questions. As we go further into the session, we're going to answer the most popular questions and deep dive into them. So feel free to share them if they're anything specific to the industry, to your startup, to what you're building, so we can give you some meaningful feedback. Oh, yes. And in addition to that, I believe feedback is a gift. So also towards the end of the session, if any of you have questions specifically about your startup, what you're doing with product, what you're trying to accomplish with investing, we're going to take some cold call. We'll let you raise your hands and hear a quick 60-second pitch on what you're doing and how we can guide you there on either product-related feedback or investing feedback. So we'll take a few of those at the end of the session as well.
We have a quick question. Yeah, let's take a quick question here.
For those of us who are interested in that feedback but are pitching at 1 o'clock, are you sticking around for those pitches?
I will be around for some of it, but I'm not involved in those panels for the pitchings. Mm-hmm.
So we have a couple of questions here, and I want to maybe look at. A lot of people are very interested in your thoughts on the trends in terms of investment in applied AI and deep tech startups. So I would love to just hear your thoughts on what startups have you seen in this space, and which ones have you invested in, and which ones haven't?
So companies that I've invested in that I'm excited that we've invested in, and ones that we may have missed out on are anti-portfolio. Yeah. Excited to have backed a few years ago Keys AI. Keys AI is built in the Denver Boulder area by Taylor Margot and his team. They build conversational extensions for the dating space. So when you use apps like Tinder, Hinge, and Bumble, and you're not sure the next conversation to share, they will prompt you with those conversations. Nice. Yeah, exactly. So we backed them in 2020 before this was a big thing. And in mid 2022, they got to the top of the Apple App Store. They were featured for 1 week, and then they started, blowing up with user growth. Now they're about 300,000 users, so it's still quite small, but they're growing in that space. They started with text recommendations, so say something funny, say something serious, move us to get to a coffee meeting, right? Those kind of prompts. But then they continue to evolve. And how did they build this, by the way? They early built into the OpenAI integrations, right? So they weren't building this by themselves. They were using like GPT-1, GPT-2, and evolved over time. But then they also brought other products. They used DALL-E and DALL-E 2 and started saying, send a funny GIF, send a funny image. So they started generating images. The product got even more smart. In the last year, they said, we are going to read your text and then recommend the next response. So share a screenshot from another app of a thread, and then we'll translate what should be the next chat to accelerate that conversation. So why was I excited to back this company? Early on, what Taylor and the team were building, they had no app. They had nothing but literally a Figma designs and the quick flight simulator of here's how these 5 steps would look like. But it didn't exist. And it was so exciting. His passion as a founder and the speed at which he and his team were building new features, that's something we got excited for. So we backed them early on, and now they're approaching, about 1 million ARR. So they're still pretty small in the space, but we're excited. They're gearing up for their Series A. That's a great one that we backed.
Yeah, I just want to follow up on that. What did you think about their founder market fit in that particular space?
So for them, they were 3 co-founders. One of them was like the business co-founder, this like CEO person, which is Taylor, but he's also a product guy. So that was really nice. He built a roadmap, see where the futures were going. They have a CTO. This is someone who was like an engineer, worked in the data space. So they were working with the APIs from OpenAI. And the third person was all about go to market, all about marketing, all about positioning. So I think that worked really well for this team. Early on, they also worked with a product studio. So as founders, you got to be scrappy, especially when you're trying to raise money. So they had some, part-time engineers that supported them to build. Of course, now they've raised a few $1 million. They're a bigger team. So a lot of things are in-house.
So definitely seems like a very strong team at the beginning to get the ball rolling, push the rock up the hill type of thing. Do you want to say more about that?
Well, I'll say that their user growth didn't happen magically overnight. And I think this is what we forget as founders. It's not like overnight you check a box and you're hundreds of thousands of users. They've been building now for 3.5 years, and they only hit these milestones 6 months ago. So it takes time, and it takes persistence and resilience to believe in your vision that you're building something for the market that needs to be completed.
Absolutely. So what's an example of a company that you wish you had invested in the last couple of years and you passed up on?
Yeah, so let me pull up the details of this one. They're actually doing really well. So
Sorry.
I'm in the Google family now, and early on I knew an ex-Googler. And she was building in the infrastructure space. So the company that Helen and their team are building is called EngFlow. EngFlow basically takes Google's Blaze, which is our infrastructure system that scales like Kubernetes and container management to like thousands and millions of fleets, but then helps those deployments happen faster, helps automate, streamline, and reduce compilation time. So early on in the pre-seed round, I had the opportunity to invest directly, but their product wasn't fully there. It was just Helen before she brought her co-founders in. And I was like, I believe in what she's doing. I met her. She's in New York. But I wasn't high conviction yet, because I was thinking, just because you can build something at Google scale, will other companies be willing to pay for that, to license this, to speed up their deployments? Is it a big enough pain point that other startups need to reduce from spending 4 hours to deploy to 5 minutes? It happened to be that was the case, that now they've raised over 100 million. A16 was their last round. They've grown a lot. They have a lot of customers. So really thrilled for what she and the whole company is building. I think as a VC, you're always going to have an anti-portfolio. You're always going to miss out on bets. But that's something that is great also for those founders, is to prove me wrong that they could do it and that they're continuing to grow in the market.
I'd love to follow on this thread of, a lot of people think that, you go to a VC one time and you pitch and they either say yes or no. But a lot of the time it seems to be more of a getting to know the person, following up over and over again, sending them updates. I'd love to just shift a little bit towards how you work with the companies that you do invest in, and how you actually end up investing in them, whether that's like they just find you and they pitch to you, or you get to know them over time.
Yeah, so for us, we have now just about 30 portfolio companies, and there's a variety of ways that we meet founders. We meet them through founders we already backed. So someone says, hey, you should meet this other founder. So the story I just mentioned about Keys AI and Taylor, just the other week, I met a really awesome founder who's building something super special in the policy factuality space for models that we're getting ready to back. Just through that introduction, we chatted. So I think introductions, warm intros, is one of the best ways that founders should connect to investors. It's a great way to build trust, early advocacy. Beyond that, you can always pitch. I think most VCs are super open to it. Like, we have a pitch form. I think almost every fund does. That's a great way to start that conversation going as well. Some founders who we've spoken to, we've been in dialogue for 3, 6, 9 months and back them later on and give them meaningful feedback on, hey, what are some of the milestones you can hit? I think some of you may have heard this in the sessions earlier. There was a VC-focused one yesterday that was all about that, what milestones, getting closer in the roadmap. I think that's one data point as well. I think beyond that, it's of course constantly understanding what you're building and where you're moving in that space, if it's aligned with the investor. I don't know if the investors spoke about this yesterday. We exclusively focus on applied AI, which means if you're building data, ML, AI, deep tech with like AI hardware or quantum, we will invest. If you're not building in any of these spaces, we will not invest. So you could pitch me and I'll say, thank you for your pitch, but you're building a food tech startup, you do nothing in the AI space. I'm happy to introduce you to other investors. I'm happy to still give you feedback, but you're off thesis. We won't invest. And I think this is something early stage founders don't often realize. So they'll pitch 100 VCs, but 80 of them don't even invest on thesis. And so you want to save your time to make sure you identify what is the focus area of the investor, so you align and you can save your time during your fundraising process.
So since you brought up a little bit about what types of companies you do invest in, do you want to just describe a little bit more high level what your investment thesis is and why?
Yeah, so DataPower Ventures invests in early stage applied AI startups. So if you're building anything in that space, typically enterprise focused, we want to see how you can build the infrastructure, the developer tools, the platforms, the applications to accelerate the data and the AI economy. Here's another case of one of our portfolio companies. We have Sumatra AI, which is based in Texas. The founder spent 9 years at Apple. He built their ML and fraud detection ecosystem. And what they built today is a platform for any company to build fraud detection tools through their APIs. So we backed Greg when the tool didn't even fully exist. He was building the SDK, he was building the APIs. And again, we were thinking, is this a big enough problem? Does every company need to have a data science team to build fraud ML tools from scratch? Or could they use some connector? And that's what this company built. We spoke early on to them, really believed in the vision, believed in the experience of the founders. And now they have quite a few customers. They've figured out their sales motion and they've been doing quite well.
That's excellent. Some people here want to learn a little bit more about, do you want to talk about the Mosaic ML acquisition?
Yeah, so we know the AI space is heating up, right? There's been some acquisitions lately. Mosaic ML recently got acquired. For those who don't know, they're one of these platforms in the LLM space, and a lot of companies aren't in the space. So Databricks is the company that purchased Mosaic ML. It's too soon to tell. And by the way, I'm not a financial advisor, so I can't really give advice if it was a good acquisition or not. But Databricks is known for making acquisitions in spaces that they don't play in the data space to get access there. In the past, they've bought CI/CD infrastructure tools. They bought out different dashboard tools. They've been expanding their product offering. This has been a clear strategy for Databricks for years. They have a whole M&A team, a corporate finance team that chooses to find early startups, buy them to scale their products, because Databricks wants to be the platform for data mesh, data layer analytics. So I think it makes sense why they bought them. But this whole space is hot now, maybe hot like fintech was a few years ago and crypto was a few years ago. So I don't know if the price is aligned, but their team must have thought it was alignment for them.
If you were to predict, what do you think are going to be the other spaces where major acquisitions or major news happens?
So I think that the issue with this whole generative AI space today is most companies are building on OpenAI. And if you're building on an API, you may not be able to get to scale to acquire if you're not doing something unique enough. Mosaic ML built their own system. Anthropic, which Google's backed, has built its own system. We're seeing that with companies. If you are building your own infrastructure, if you're building your own dev tools, if you're solving real hard software problems, that's a good space to be in and always has been. It goes back to the example I shared earlier with Helen and what they're building at EngFlow. They built a Google scale system for anyone. It's what Greg and Sumatra's built. They took an Apple-led, fraud ML system, but for anyone. If you're thinking about these types of applications, I think that's a good space to be in.
Definitely. Do we want to open it up for anybody that is building in applied AI, ML, data infrastructure to do a 60-second pitch and get real-time feedback?
I would love to do that, but first let me take a quick look at more of the Slido, because I know some of you put in a lot of thought and effort to share your questions, so I'm going to address some more of those. But to share to Mo's point, if any of you are thinking about that pitch and you want to get some real-time feedback on product or investing in maybe 3 or 4 minutes, we'll open up for there. So let's take a look here at all of these. Okay, so here's one question. Actually, one of the startups shared that John from Style Love said, so they're building a platform to give artists a new way to engage and be compensated for use of their styles in generative AI. How important is it to find an ethical way to do this? So user-generated content is going through a big policy push right now. If you've been following in the EU, they just put a whole new bill that's basically banning using any content without monetizing it. We've seen the New York Times just last week built a consortium saying you can't use any of our news articles to generate systems without the right policies in place. So I think it's great to build a platform where you build a data flywheel that user-generated content improves and makes your models better. But you need to be very cautious with your terms and conditions, because the privacy, just like we saw with GDPR a few years ago, is currently moving in the direction of user having control. And if you don't build your models right, users are going to require to opt out. You're going to have to retrain your models without that data. It'd be very expensive from a compute perspective. And I think we're going to move in that direction where a lot of models today, we're going to have to retrain. It's going to cost companies hundreds of thousands of dollars, a lot of hours. So you want to be very mindful about your ethical approach on using user data.
I think there's also a really big pattern today for owners of large, high-quality data sets. For example, in my case, selling to healthcare providers that have a bunch of patient data that they would like to build, but it's not limited to healthcare, obviously. All these large enterprises and organizations that control a set of data and want to build on top of that. In the generative AI space. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
So healthcare, financial services, government, these are all really protective ecosystems where data is very sensitive. And it's for that reason that you want to start collaboration efforts early on with your users so that later on it doesn't become an issue where that data gets pulled out and removed. I think there is a way forward. I think all these ecosystems historically have used older software, slower software, more expensive software, which creates the opportunity for yourselves as founders to disrupt that space, to provide better, faster, cheaper services. It's just ensuring that you're applying policies, you're applying ethics to this. The challenge is, it's not always up to you to decide if you apply the policy. It's following the industry trends and following your clients and customers. Now, if your customer says, I prefer you to build your tool, but to allow us to remove policies because it's our data, we want to be in control as financial institution. We want to change the flags, change the levers. You have to decide how ethical do you want to be with your product to serve your customer or to serve policy. And I think that's another trend that's going to start to emerge soon with all these large language model companies. We're going to move into a space much like databases, where there's a few hundred databases with different applications, like for financial services or healthcare. We're going to have that for models as well. But we're also going to move into a splintering where some models are open source and some are closed source. Some let you tune policies to say, actually, I want to have content that allows me to be diligent on who I do and don't serve versus I want to serve everyone.
Interesting. So what do you think the actual manifestation of that future would be? Like, could you imagine like a marketplace where you could use certain open source or even, closed source that you get to pay for, providers of, data that's protected?
So before generative AI, we've seen marketplaces for data sets. One of our companies, Nomad Data, based in New York, Brad built a marketplace where he connects enterprise data sets. So a big financial institution and a big financial services provider like Equifax could sell data to each other in a private and secure way. I think we're going to move into that same direction with models and the data sets for the models. Early on at Google, on Google Cloud, we have called our model garden. So today you could find a lot of these models, whether they're Google-based models or from like Stable Diffusion and other players. We offer those there so you can plug them directly into your entire cloud stack.
Super fascinating. And how would you get an enterprise to, let's say, offer their proprietary trained model on one of these marketplaces? Like, what would your thoughts be on trying to do something like that?
Yeah, so if you want to build this startup, wow, okay, so it depends what you want to sell in the marketplace. If we're going to sell the models, so we're thinking of creating, this is real time here, so we're brainstorming, right? Here's a new startup. We're calling this LL Models, right? So LL Models, it's a new pre-seed startup. We're building a marketplace where anyone can sell and license their models. And let's say it's this financial model for fraud detection, maybe like Greg's startup, but it's model-based. So I could buy that model and integrate it directly into my stack as well. I feel like a platform like this would probably be some sort of API call where it would integrate directly in. Probably would have some sort of usage-based pricing. We've seen a lot of movement towards usage-based pricing the last few years, where it's about data movement or call movement. And so that's great. We could build a whole platform, but how would we now make it known that people should buy it? How will we make it known that this is the platform where you get a trusted model? We'd have to start thinking about what information are you going to share to SMBs that they should use this model? Is it inclusive? Does it have certain columns and things like that?
Yeah. Excellent.
If you're building an LL model, let me know. Maybe we'll consider backing this. I think it's actually a good idea. I don't think there's many players in that space right now, but it's something we've been looking at. Who's going to build platforms or marketplaces for models and data sets? Yeah. Yeah, so I think a fair point, right? So Hugging Face is doing it, right? And even I just mentioned, Google has a model garden where you can license, but there's always room in the space for more than one entrant. And Hugging Face is huge. Google is huge. So I think they're not going to be able to do everything. They're only going to focus on a few things because they're going to move a little slower.
There is a question in here about what traction do you want to see before investing? So taking this particular example, LL model, what would you want to see before investing?
So if we're building this LL model platform, I'd want to see where does the platform exist today. So one, it's, who are the founders, right? What are you guys doing? Why are you doing this? Do you have a deep fascination in the generative AI space? Or do you just think it's the next big thing and you want to do it, right? Because I think when you build a startup, you have to be dialed in for 7 to 15 years. Upwards of 15 years, right? It is a journey. It's more than being married to someone. You're being married to your startup. What we saw during the pandemic, where you could build a venture and exit in 3 years, This is not the truth. Mosaic ML is not the truth. Mosaic ML got founded 2.5 years ago, exited for 1.3 billion. This is not the startup industry, right? You have to expect to be building for 7 to 15 years. Paperspace. Paperspace is an infrastructure platform for GPUs. Daniel has been building this out of New York and Brooklyn. I think they've spent almost 8 to 9 years on this. They just exited to DigitalOcean. This was a few days ago. Paperspace raised almost 50 million. They exited 8 years later for 113 million. How much return do you think the founders got, the investors got? Not that much, right? It took them many years to also get there. They were before their time. Fortunately, they had a nice soft landing at DigitalOcean, right? This just happened a few days ago. Big fans of what Daniel and the whole space are doing. But, again, the space always changes. So I think that's part one to that. I think also LL model, I'd be curious your traction. How many different data providers are you already partnering with to serve their models? And what does that growth look like? Are you focusing on financial services, health tech, everyone? And then do you have users who are already starting to try out your product, buy your product? These are some of the things you want to look at.
So definitely proving out the acquisition piece.
Yeah, I think I'm always known as someone who tries to give real feedback. So also the classic thing of, hey, we're going to build a company and we're going to IPO. That's generally not most startups, right? Acquisition is way more common than often thought about. So it's great to think about, in 5 to 10 years, what would our strategy be? Would Apple buy us for our fraud ML platform? Would what Keys AI is building, maybe the parent company for OkCupid and Tinder says, we're going to buy your product because we want to integrate you into the entire dating ecosystem. That could be a very plausible exit.
Very, very interesting. So are there people in the audience that would like to pitch their startup for 60 seconds? Okay, I saw that hand all the way in the back.
And before you speak, so besides the pitch, we also want to hear, what is your question, right? So is it some sort of product question? Is it some sort of fundraising question? So then both Mo and myself could give you some feedback.
You can come up so you can use a microphone, actually, if you want.
I think we have a
Do we have an extra microphone
too, right? Yeah, we could take some. Mm-hmm.
Do we have an extra microphone?
Just for the live streamers.
There we go. Beautiful.
Look at that. Mm-hmm.
Great talk. Thank you very much. My name is Ashfaq Rashid. I'm going to take you to a different place, from bits to atoms. Construction tech. Construction is 13% of world GDP, $13 trillion, about 5% of US GDP, say for $6 trillion. It's the least digitized space. I've been in construction tech for the last 20 years. Material in construction is about 50%, and material procurement and material management through a commercial construction project is still manual. It's in foreman's or superintendent's head. We are applying AI to digitize the bill of material generation straight from the drawings. Drawings are generated by architects to sell to their customer, which is the owner. So their drawings just communicate the design. When the contractors show up on the project, nothing they need to build the project is there on those drawings. So the contractors go ahead and start producing all the details that they need on the material, such as material procurement. So we just finished building the AI engine for generating materials and go ahead and build the marketplace to do the material procurement. So it's a combined SaaS and a marketplace. So that's, we are just closed a pre-seed round, going for a seed round right now, and focusing primarily on the construction tech VCs and the SaaS VCs. The question I have for you is, in the B2B space and the enterprise space, at least in this space, customers do not want to see the functionality roll out so quickly. They want to see it in a balanced way. So what is the balance that you would, as a VC, want to see? Because in last 2 days, one of the things that I have seen is, I want to see the founding teams, how quickly they're rolling out functionality nonstop. That's in last 2 days, how quickly they're producing new functionality. Whereas in my space, the users say, hold on, let me just deploy what you have, and then let me come back and see the functionality. So how do I balance between my users and my investors?
Okay, so there's two things we need to talk about. One is building product and how fast do you build product and what do you build. So building features for the sake of building features, and thank you for the question. Building for the sake of building is never the answer. Are your customers willing to pay more or further use your product if you build new features? And so often we have this fear as a startup founder that let's just build it all, ship it, launch it, and then people will use everything. But I think it is to your benefit to have more releases. You could have like big milestones. Maybe every 3 months you have some major releases, but every month you dial in with small little features. You create a blog post, you create case studies, you share about those small releases. So I think it's to your benefit not just to race towards one launch, but it's a continued launch process that you're landing with your customers. So I think that's something to consider, but you also want to ask these early design partners and customers you've been speaking to, which features they would find more valuable, or what will save them time or help them be more accurate with the material building and design process. So it's going to be that continued feedback loop with those customers. And then I mention this also because otherwise we're always building, so we feel like we're always behind. But when you create your technical roadmap that's looking further out at 3 months, 6 months, a year, then you know what you're racing towards. And then you can start communicating this to your customer for what's coming up in release candidate 2.0, release candidate 2.1. So they get excited and they see what you as the founding team keep building. So I think that's on the product side, the feedback. A question I have for you is you mentioned you just recently closed your pre-seed round, right? So I'll assume that was closed in 2023, like just recent, right?
It's my customers. 6 of them wanted to invest before I go raise the fund. So it is, and I'm actually oversubscribed on that, and they're forcing me to reopen that. So I close it on safe rounds. It's my customers who have invested in me.
Yeah, so that's very exciting because a great thing that you just mentioned is if your customers are willing to invest, you're on something in the right track probably, right? They're like, we love not only paying for your product, but we want to invest and see you successful, which means fast forward 5 to 7 years, maybe one of them will, if they're a big company, right? Maybe one of them will acquire what you're building. I think beyond that, depending on how much capital you raised in that safe round, you want to be mindful on how you're positioning, because if you just closed on this round and you're like, oh, we closed our pre-seed and now we're raising a seed 3 months later, an investor might say, but why? What have you done with all the capital to achieve new milestones to raise a seed? So you'll want to consider some of that positioning. It may have been a smaller round. Maybe it was only a few $100,000, but just some food for thought.
Yeah, it was a smaller round. It was few.
Yeah, so it may even be like a small friend, family, insider round kind of thing. So great story, and thanks for sharing what you're building.
I actually have a quick question.
I'm Ashfaq Rashid, by the way. AEC inspires the company.
So how did you come across? Did you work in construction before? Is this?
I've been in this space for last 25 years. Apple campus, Google campus, San Francisco Airport, 49er Stadium, Ram Stadium. We've been involved building all of those things. So
Nice, awesome. All right, thank you. Yeah, I think we have time to take one more. Sure. Do you want to head over to the side for the microphone? Oh, I'm sorry. There's somebody at the microphone already.
I'll be very quick.
So we'll take 2
Sure.
more.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Go ahead.
I'm Marco, founder of Swoopin Inc. And Swoopin, we're live on iOS. If you want to type in Swoopin on the App Store, you'll see it. Android coming this month. I haven't met any Android users. Are there Android users? Raise your hand. Oh, okay.
Hi,
For real.
Google Pixel
Cool.
user here.
All right, awesome. So this month, faster if you invest. But Swoopin, it's a location-based social app. Think of Waze for your social life. We're built on Google Maps, and people post emojis representing everything they're doing, from a private party for friends to a bar posting, hey, we're doing this happy hour, or we're having karaoke tonight. So it's essentially crowdsourcing everything happening in the community on a geospace, real life. I open up YouTube every morning and I see more and more generated AI content on my feed. And I can understand the fear that a lot of people have when they say, okay, the online space, like humans, are going to get crowded out. AI is going to be used to optimize everything. What are our jobs eventually going to be? And the answer that I give to people is, we need to make real life more meaningful again. We need to connect with our local communities again. We got to bring back the third place so that we can go to a coffee shop and we don't know who we're going to meet that, could potentially change our lives again. And so that is where we're a ground up designed social network for augmenting human interaction in real space, real time. So I come to this Startup Founders Weekend and I see that 90% of the startups are AI. And I see how, okay, who is addressing the challenge of bringing people back to reality, giving our day-to-day lives, meaning with our free time? And I see a lot of ways that AI could augment our platform of Swoopin, from doing user recommendations based on history of pins that you connect with, all the way to scraping other events platforms and websites and adapting it to our short-form event content. So my question for you is, given that your thesis is AI, machine learning, am I going off thesis if I focus on roadmap features and say that, we can have basically AI be a core component of our social app, but I wouldn't say it is like the foundational piece of our platform?
Okay, a few things I want to clarify there and ask further. So first, an early comment you shared about AI user-generated content. We are seeing a proliferation of that going online right now. And early data is showing is that content is going to be severely penalized by all platforms. Human user-generated content is getting much higher scoring. I'm not speaking on behalf of any specific company, but there are early data in the public that they're penalizing AI-generated content. So as platforms, you want to be mindful that I think human content is still going to win, and that's going to be surfaced higher. Then to your second point about building your platform and how do you prioritize what features and then to make that investable in some aspect. First, for what you're building, there is a need for this in the space. I think, Meetup failed to do this. And of course, Meetup's acquisition by WeWork and then spun out caused the platform to die, even though it's been resurfacing. So there's a lot of platforms that were centripetal to the space that aren't anymore. And this post-COVID energy of coming back to real life, like we see from our tech weekend here, means that people crave these in-person collaborative experiences, but it's challenging to surface them. So a platform like yours could help facilitate that. And I think there's a need in the market, and early data is showing some platforms there, and perhaps you're one of the new incumbents in this space. How do you decide if you build or not AI, and if you build for fundraising? So if you build or not, it depends. Is it going to make your current app that much more usable, that much more sticky, where whatever metrics you're tracking, more events are happening, more people are attending events, more people are attending and rating higher quality events based on being recommended, attend this happy hour. So if these are going to create more of that stickiness and continued usage in your app, it might make sense to consider one of these features. Should you prioritize it because the whole market is saying AI everything, everyone's building 90%? Not necessarily, because it could be a distraction. It could move you off your core thesis, and then you may spend months building to ship something, and then it doesn't change any of your metrics or your behavior. The last part of your question is, okay, we're building this, but we're not core AI yet today. So would DataPower invest? It's possible. It just depends on what you're doing around those experiences. For us, generally, we focus on enterprise, but we make exceptions. Keys AI is not enterprise, right? They're consumer. They're focusing on the dating. So I think it's a fun space. I think there's a lot of opportunity there. But I will say the consumer space is a little slower to rebound in this market right now. So your positioning is something to consider as you raise.
Thank you so much. You've answered a very existential question I've had all weekend. So appreciate it.
Sure.
All right, awesome.
Thank you. So my name is Vuk. I'm a founder of Anablock. We are a recruiting marketplace. I've spent 20 years in enterprise software as an engineer and architect, and I'm specifically addressing issues that exist around recruiting, specifically like finding quality candidates, recruiters being able then to screen those candidates statically and also from a cultural fit perspective. So our platform is essentially loading, specifically right now, we're focused primarily on the Salesforce ecosystem. So actually, I should say we launched in February, so we have a lot of features developed, but what we're doing is we're screening candidates before they can join the platform. And then we're making them available to recruiters and other customers that need either contractors, freelance, for example, developers worldwide. As a matter of fact, our backend is Deal. And then we are actually using AI to help recruiters quickly create job descriptions, personalize those job descriptions based on specific criteria, and then semantic search for the chatbot to match our database of candidates with whatever the recruiters or companies are looking for. So I think my primary question is going to be more product related. What is your experience so far related to like recruiting bots? In general, like we're recruiting co-pilots. There's a lot of terminology, personal assistants from that level. And where do you see that space going, in which direction?
So the HR tech space has had a lot of movement in the hiring craze of the pandemic when every tech company was hiring and growing, and that slowed down recently, which I'm sure can inform what core features you build. Are you building today for the enterprise who's hiring or the candidate who's searching to be hired? My hunch would be that more candidates are looking to be hired these days, so you may want to over-index on that side of your platform matching today. But we are seeing early signals that potentially the market is improving. Early signals, we don't know yet, right? We have to give the next 6 months to see what the Fed does with rates and everything. But the ADP employment report that came out last week showed that payroll, again, is going back up. A lot of people getting hired, less jobs, less unemployment. So it's early data, but it doesn't mean all data. For your platform, it's good what you're building because I think you're going to be insulated from policy changes that are occurring. So recently, New York passed a bill last week that any company that uses software to screen candidates, that in the event that a candidate is underrepresented and the candidate sues for not getting a job, the software platform is not impacted. So you would be completely insulated from this policy, but the employers are at risk. So this is new policy that passed in New York. I think this is going to happen all across the country. Historically, New York and California are the most favorable for employees over the rest of the country. So I think that's some initial thoughts, but happy to dive deeper if you have second parts to the question.
No, I think that was just in general, I guess, just more to get your thoughts based on what you've seen in the industry and obviously being part of the industry for so long.
Yeah. So as I share it all, I do think there's a need for everything that you're doing. I think these features are critical because it's a very manual, labor-intensive process to screen candidates. If you are in people ops and HR, often recruiters only spend 8 seconds on every resume, sometimes 30 seconds, but they don't have the time. So they do need like an AI-powered tool, perhaps like you're building, to enable that. It's just making sure that you might have certain disclosures there on the candidate and recruiter side.
And just kind of segue a little bit to that is like, do you see any benefits integrating with some other platforms, like for example, I think it was Greenpoint. So there's a lot of these other platforms that companies use internally when they have specific like rec requirements. So one of the thoughts, like, do we spend time integrating that way they can push directly into our platform instead of maybe doing a little bit of manual work?
Yeah, I would say if I had to make a quick hunch here, don't build the next HR tech platform, connect into ones like Greenhouse and these other platforms to make it easier, because these companies are tied in and they spend hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars on these platforms a year, so they're not going to switch to a new platform. But if you make an easy connector integration, whether it's a Chrome extension or it's something into the platform, you try to make it seamless, especially for HR platforms and these teams that traditionally don't understand tech as much and are slower to change and resist, and they're always overworked. So if you can make it seamless for them, that's quite high impact.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. You want to take one more? Okay. All right.
Okay, we're gonna take let's take one more founder.
Hi. My name is Peter. I'm from Switzerland, so excuse me if the English is not perfect. And I have to say I didn't prepare for this because I didn't know that there's going to be some pitching. But thanks for the chance. So there's actually, I'm not pitching what I'm here for, but I'm pitching an idea which I had early on. And it just inspired me to share it with the planet, which is the first time actually. So you said before that I think the biggest issue today is getting valuable information from data, right? And that's what you are using AI for. I couldn't agree more. I mean, I've been working in data for the last years, and I think actually I would say the biggest issue is to extract valuable information from dynamic data, from dynamic distributed data, because what most people forget is that data is changing, but most databases are static. And that's something which is occurred to me like a completely unsolved problem in the field. And I think I have a good solution for this. A nice way to collect data and interpret it later and provide views for people, like for actual enterprise applications, which I did build for the last years. All these things were deterministic. So it was always deterministic model. So there's nothing with AI so far. And that's the vision, and that's what I would like to introduce you. So I think there's a huge chance, especially speaking about dynamic data, in recurrent neural networks, because they are able to understand causality and to keep the causality within the data. And I think if you are speaking about enterprise businesses, what the main thing is, you do something and something happens. And if you want to run your business successfully, you need to link exactly these things. So you cannot look on static data. You have to understand the causality of what you did and what was the result. So the vision is to use what I did already and to run a huge recurrent neural network, like a brain of a business that learns while the business is running what happens if, and over time starts to be able to make suggestions or even run the whole business independently. So yeah, that's the idea.
Awesome. Thank you for the pitch.
Thank you.
So I thought you were going to go about building a database, but I was going to say that's a really hard problem. So glad that you're not building a database. But we see that you could always have new databases in the market, right? Nikita left Single Store to build Neon. We have our former CPO who launched Mother.db. We have Ito at Pinecone, right? So there's always new databases out there. But what you're suggesting is like, hey, these models today are so expensive and they're not dynamic, right? So you train a version of Bard and then it's there, but you might have to spend hundreds of thousands of hours and compute and time to get the new model. So can you create something more dynamic? And I think today the large language models are all static. So you might be onto something. You'd have to, but similar to building a database, it's a hard problem to figure out where are you computationally adjusting like hashes and stacks so that you can make it more dynamic. And how do you make that not expensive from a compute perspective. So I think if you're able to create some sort of better engine that serves these models to be more dynamic and to reduce the cost, regardless of parameter size, that could be a very interesting infrastructure play that may be an interesting piece that people would pay for in this space.
All right, thank you. Well, actually, maybe I had something.
Yeah, please. And let me know if I heard that right or if I took that in the wrong direction.
Kind of. Actually, the model already exists. The thing is just to train something. And I'm actually also, so in my free time, building this, my own deep learning network. So I don't use just some existing API because I think they are not made for this kind of things, actually. But thanks for the...
Awesome. Thank you for the pitch. And thanks, everyone, for tuning in for the session.
Thank you all. And I think the next thing is a startup pitch competition. So we'll have... The next thing is a pitch competition. Yeah, so we'll keep hearing more pitches. But yeah, thank you. One more round of applause for David. All right. Yeah, good stuff.
Okay, just a quick update. We'll be doing the tech check, and with